Good evening, everyone, and thank you all for coming. This night's meeting, it's a special joint meeting with the Whitman-Hanson town officials and the Whitman-Hanson Regional School Committee, and I want to thank everyone for coming. In a minute, we'll get into introducing ourselves because I see some new faces, and it's good and that everybody's concerned. I'd ask you to please join me in a moment of silence and keep in your thoughts the 60 people who lost their lives in Las Vegas and also the hundreds that are trying to recover from this awful tragedy. So please keep them in your thoughts. Thank you. Can we please rise for the salute to the flag? I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Again, thank you all for coming. We have some new people in the gallery this evening, so I'm going to start in the gallery. We have State Representative Josh Cutler with us. So Josh, thank you for coming. We have Jeff Deal's aide here this evening, Jackie Double-Onus. She's here, so thank you very much. We have Mrs. George in the gallery. Thank you for coming. We have our faithful Hanson Express reporter. Thank you for coming. And if we could start with Mr. Lynham and just go around the table.
I'm here. Frank Lynham, Town Administrator, Whitman.
Rick Anderson, Whitman Finance Committee Chair.
Kyle Riley, Assistant Superintendent of Student Services.
Chris Howard, School Committee.
Michael Jones, School Committee.
Bob Trotter, School Committee.
Bob Hayes, School Committee.
Ruth Gilbert Whitner, Superintendent of Schools.
Christine Suko, Director of Business Services.
Fred Small, School Committee.
Dan Kennedy, School Committee.
Mike McHugh, Town Administrator, Hanson.
Jim McGann, Selectman Hanson.
Michelle Lindbergh, Recording Secretary.
Recording Secretary. Thank you, everyone. If you look in, everyone grab some, what was in front of you. We have minutes of the last meeting that Michelle recorded. We had approved these. If you just take a quick moment and review them and see if there's anything that you disagree with or there's anything that we have to correct. As you know, we're discussing budget, and this is some new type of territory. We're trying to have better communications with the input from the town and from each of the towns. As we get started this evening, I'd like to remind everyone we are also looking at rewriting parts of the Whitman-Hanson Regional Agreement, which includes both towns. We have impaneled the committee. We have people from both towns. We have some people from DESE that are coming also to do it. Mars, that's right.
Yep. Massachusetts.
Massachusetts Association of Regional School Committees.
Regional schools. No
Regional
committees.
schools. And they're helping with it. We have already gone over it. And as I said at town meeting, and when Whitman gets their date, I'd like to come, Frank, and speak, if we could talk to the moderator briefly, so people understand. Anyone watching this evening, this has nothing really to do with tonight's meeting, but it does, because we are re-looking at the regional agreement and opening up, and we're updating a ton of what is antiquated on the regional agreement. So anyone that would like any input on anything to do with the regional agreement, our next meeting is October 30th, here in the library at 6 o'clock. You are more than welcome. It's an open meeting. We would love to see a lot of people here present for the second meeting. And again, if you have any input that you like, we will have copies of the agreement. We will have copies of what the changes are going to be. And we are taking questions, answers, suggestions, whatever. So feel free to come. In fact, we implore you to come. Please come and join this, because when it's all over, I don't want anybody saying we didn't have a chance to have input. We're going to have several meetings about this because it hasn't been rewritten since 1991, and we want to get it right. So thank you for listening to me. Has everyone looked at these minutes? Any changes, anything we deviated from, you think, or is it pretty accurate? Okay, great. We're going to get right into the financial planning and the budget projections for FY 2019 and beyond. And I believe Christine, who was our business manager, and Ruth Gilbert Whitner, who was our superintendent of schools, will come up and start, so.
Good. Thank you very much, and thank you for this opportunity to begin our budget planning for FY 2019. What we would like to do is begin by talking about the FY 2018 budget and where we are going from there. The current budget that we're working on during this school year, 2017-2018, represents what we call a level service budget and represents an increase of about 3.2% from last year's budget. If you recall, when this budget was passed, that originally the request had been for an increase in the assessment from the towns of approximately 11%. After working with both towns, the overall increase was a little bit over 8%. In order to make this a level service budget and not to have to go to overrides, we did look at some consolidation of programs. We also have noted that our enrollment is declining. In 2009, our enrollment was about 4,500 students. For this year, an estimated October 1 enrollment is about 4,000 students. So that's a significant decrease in the last 9 years. And so we were able to create what we call a level service budget with the operating assessment increases from the two towns. This year's FY 2018 budget is very tight because of that, but I do think going to an override would have been problematic. So that's where we are today. Essentially, nothing new or different from FY 17, but clearly we had a maternity leave we didn't fill. We were able to consolidate 2 special education programs due to the size of the student population. So there are a number of adjustments we've made. And you may be aware we have one principal for the McQuon and the Indian Head School, Dr. Beth Wilcox, this year, where in the past we have funded 2 principals. In addition to that, our operating costs are a little bit different this year because we have an interim person filling for the position vacated by Assistant Superintendent Pat Dillon when he resigned in September, so we now have an interim. That represents some cost savings and other items such as that. So we have a 3.2% increase in the budget. We're calling it level service. A true level service budget this year would have been up a little more than that, but just wanted to give you a sense of where we are today. As you know, we've been talking about our strategic plan for a while. We have a strategic plan that was approved last October 12th for the years 2016 to 2019. With that plan, we do what is called radar planning, which is really looking at resources, reallocating resources, looking at the needs of the district. We have our 3 pillars of success. Every child, every day with healthy minds, healthy bodies, Pillar 1. Pillar 2 is a PK-12 system of cohesive teaching and learning. Pillar 3 is safe and secure schools. All of our budgetary decisions are aligned with those 3 pillars, the objectives, and our strategic initiatives. We met as recently as this week to fine-tune what those action plans look like for FY 18 and beyond. In our strategic plan, in addition to level services, there are things in the budget that we believe are right for the students of Whitman-Hanson. These are in no order of priority or preference, but I'm going to discuss each one briefly. The one is foreign language. At this point in time, we teach French and Spanish at the high school, predominantly Spanish. We teach Spanish at the middle schools. We have 1 teacher per school. This is significantly lower than our surrounding communities and significantly lower than where we were when I came to Whitman-Hanson in 1994. Big concern for foreign language. Our students are living in a world where facility with foreign language is very important to their success. Since 2000, we have been trying to implement full-day kindergarten in Whitman-Hanson. We are now part of the 15% of public school districts in Massachusetts who still have families paying for full-day kindergarten. 85% of all school systems in Massachusetts have no-cost full-day kindergarten. This is of a significant concern to us for a number of reasons. We have many more children in the full-day program. However, we still have a population of students, about 25 to 30%, who are going to half-day sessions. If we're looking at equity, I think this is a real concern, and the leadership team, administrative team, has highlighted that in our action plans. So foreign language, no-cost full-day kindergarten. Also significant concerns about related arts. At this point in time, we have 2 art teachers for the entire high school. We have hired on a very limited basis an instrumental music person to work 3 mornings a week in our schools. The actual instrumental music position that was providing services to elementary students was eliminated in 2007, 10 years ago. So our music program really has taken a hit because of budget problems. Related arts is a big issue for us because we know for many of our students, this is what enhances learning for them and helps school feel relevant. We also have concerns about student support services. We have Title I, which is a grant-funded program in the Whitman schools because that's a federal grant, but it is also aligned to socioeconomics, and in Whitman qualifies, the Hanson programs do not. We do not have those academic support services in Hanson. However, we do believe that they are needed. These are in English language arts and mathematics, and when we get to middle school, very little support for students who are not reading at grade level. We're also looking at student services for social emotional learning. Very fortunate this year to have services through North River 1 day a week of a licensed social worker, and in addition to that, we have social work interns who are available to us through North River. However, in terms of school adjustment counselors, social workers, kind of the same sort of thing, very limited, and yet we know that anxiety, mental health issues are an everyday concern for us here at Whitman-Hanson. So not only academic support services, but also support services for social emotional concerns. We also look at our school schedules. If you recall, when budgets were tight several years ago, we staggered the opening times of Duval and Conley, so we didn't have to use as many buses. We also pushed the opening time here at the high school to 5 minutes earlier, and as a result of that, we did save about 6 teaching positions. But for professional development, it's caused a big concern here in the district, because when we try to bring all elementary teachers together, there's only a very short period of time on an early release day that we can meet with all of them at the same time. The leadership believes having schools start in alignment with each other would improve teaching and learning in the district and clearly professional development for our staff. It's a significant cost. We know we cut costs by $300,000 about 500 years ago, or 5 years ago, and that's a long time ago. And we know to bring that back is going to cost somewhere between $300,000 and $400,000. Safety and security is another issue. Very lucky here at Whitman-Hanson to have a good system of cameras and scans into doors, trying to make sure we know who's there. We have been reworking the entrances. If you see here at the high school, we've reworked the entrance 2 years ago, and we're able to do that at the Hanson Middle School and the Whitman Middle School. That is work that still needs to be done in our elementary schools, so that when there are people coming into our buildings, it's very evident to our administrative assistants who's coming in, who's there, who's in our buildings. Those costs are there. In addition to that, we are looking at safety and security programs. One is one that will create an app that can be used to contact our first responders if there should be an emergency. Those are all items from our strategic plan. They are not level services. They are above and beyond level services, but clearly what we're seeing in other school districts and what we believe would make Whitman-Hanson the type of district that we believe it should be. In addition to the strategic plan and action plans, the closing of McQuon School is another issue that we're working with this year, and looking at the various costs involved in the moving. Many of these are one-time costs, but they include moving expenses. They include retrofitting of classrooms and buildings, moving walls, cleaning, moving, doing a variety of things. So we do know over time there will be reduced costs. When you go from 7 schools to 6 schools, sooner or later, you're going to have reduced costs. And I know, Christine, you've done some thinking in terms of what that's going to look like, but clearly insurances, utilities,
our custodial services, and just general maintenance at McQuon, and any of those capital items that we have had on the matrix that we took off when we decided that we were going to close McQuon School. So those are
Right.
big, big savings.
Thank you. And originally, the capital matrix that we had was looking for about $5 million to keep McQuon up and running and at least to make it the safe school would want it to be. When that didn't seem to be what was going to be happening, that's why we moved forward with actually the closing of the school. So there eventually will be reduced costs, and we'd be looking at the reallocation of those resources. But up front, there will be moving costs as well. And Christine's been working with Ernie Sandland and the rest of the administrative team to determine what those costs will be. So we look at moving costs, some cost savings, what they will actually be, we will see. I think we're looking in terms of positions, it's more likely to be just not filling retirements rather than losing positions, which I think is really good for our staff. But clearly with reduced enrollment and things, that's likely to happen. And then, of course, the reallocation of resources over time. When you close a building, you may not see that change in funding right away, but clearly over the next few years, we would see that. One of the biggest concerns with McQuon were unexpected expenses. Summer a year ago, we had a terrible leak from the boys' bathroom down into the first floor. That was a capital expense that had to go back to the town of Hanson, and numerous things happen all the time because of the aging building. So those are things that are unique, above and beyond level services. When we look at the FY 2019 budget and look at just straight level services, based on what we know, if we didn't add any of the things that I just talked about in the action plan, and of course we're uncertain just what the closing of McQuon will do for the FY 2019 budget, we are probably looking, and this is an estimate, just a basic increase of 5 to 6%. And that's adding nothing new. And this is what we saw last year, and these are the things that we must take into account. We can't give you exact numbers today, but this is what goes into our thinking. We are now going into negotiations for all four of our bargaining units. We don't know what that's going to cost. We can make a best guess. We know what it cost the last time, and when we look at this 5 to 6%, that's what we've taken into consideration.
And Ruth, for clarification, that's on the budget, not on the assessments.
That's true. That's the operating budget, absolutely. Yeah, we're talking 5 to 6% operating budget. What it takes in terms of an assessment's a whole different computation. Thank you, Frank. The next one is of huge concern, I think, to everybody here, and that is we don't know about health insurance. We don't know what it's going to cost. We don't know what it's going to look like. The committee has had presentations to look at this. I know, Christine, maybe you want to just jump in a little bit on health insurance.
Right. I know that Mayflower is nowhere near ready to set the rates. Is that correct, Frank? It'll probably be a few months anyway, right?
Yeah, in order to set the rates, we need at least 6
months.
6 months of activity, but the trend right now is good.
Yeah, the fund is good right now, right?
The trend of cost is good.
Yeah, so that's at least a plus. This year, the increase was, what, 15, 16%?
16% for the,
Yeah,
The top-
the overall was 11.5.
Right.
But depending on which plan
Right, that you
the
look at.
employees were in, the more generous plans, what we refer
Was
to as
16.
legacies,
Yeah,
were 16%. Interestingly enough, they are not having any difficulty there. Those are fully performing
we have
at
about,
that number.
we have close to 90% of our participants
Right.
in those plans.
And that's a problem because
Right.
it's expensive, yeah.
the problem is the health insurance is a basic need and a benefit for people. And there's only one way to save money. Well, you can try and reduce medical costs, but that's like emptying the ocean into a pail. Or you can pass the costs on. So what happens is many of the plans that are now offered are less generous than the plans that you currently have. They require more co-pays, they require deductibles, they require limitations on where people can go, and they still cost more money. So it's a national challenge. It's not just.
No, but it makes it very difficult to know what your budget's going to look like. And if you look at our budget over the past few years, we've had everything from 0% increases to 3 to 16 to 12, so it's all over the place, and that makes it very difficult when we're trying to give you exact numbers of where we are. The other thing that we have to take into account are contractual obligations. We know that our student transportation for FY19 will be up by 4%. Most of our other contracts aren't up at that level, and you, Christine, you said a couple of them are locked in.
Yeah,
Yes.
Collegiate Press is level.
And that's our copy center, so that's a level increase, so we don't have to worry about that. And
SJ is up 3%, but we will recognize some savings in part of the year by closing McQuon, so it's be an offset. Same with the building insurances are, I can say that probably about 10%, but McQuon will go offline, so that'll probably be a wash as well. Workman's comp is probably, it most definitely will be up because it's based on the salary, total salary for the district, so.
yeah, those are obligations we need to meet just to make budget. So negotiations, health insurance, contractual obligations. The next one that we find very difficult in funding and that we wanted to mention as well this evening are unfunded and underfunded mandates. And the one that comes to mind more than anything else is McKinney-Vento. McKinney-Vento is the requirement that we must provide transportation for students who become homeless. So when a student becomes homeless, if a student is residing in Whitman-Hanson area when that happens and goes to a shelter, a DCF location, something such as that, and if that student and student's family determine they want the student to remain at Whitman-Hanson, we are required to pay for the transportation for that student to come that distance back to school and home again at the end of the day. Thanks to Suzanne Bump, state auditor, there is some money that comes from the state that helps offset this. But the amount from the state, unfortunately, doesn't match the amount that it actually costs. And I'm going to ask Christine, if you know off the top of your
Yeah,
head
it's
what
about
we spent last year,
$65,000,
and what did we get in reimbursement?
about 30% of that.
Right. So,
How many students?
it's 10,
Yeah.
11, yeah. Our
Somewhere
numbers
between
are
10 and
about that.
12.
And it can become very, very costly. A couple of years ago, we had a student, fortunately it was at the end of the school year, who became homeless and was being transported from the Waltham area. We have Diane Naughton and Karen Villanueva, who are our transportation coordinators, are masterful at trying to find the most effective and efficient way to transport students. And they know in our southeastern Massachusetts area who they can call, who will work, but once you have a kid coming from the Boston suburbs, western suburbs, that's a whole different ballgame. That particular student, who's now gone, was close to $300 a day, just for transportation. These are costs we do not know from year to year what's going to happen. I am able to use a little bit of the Title I grant for DCF children who are in placements, but this can be extremely expensive and hard to plan for because you don't know what's going to happen.
To just give the raw numbers for those that might be watching, we spent $65,000 on McKinney-Vento, and we received $19,500 reimbursement. So if you do the math, it's about a 30%. It's a $45,000. It's a teacher.
It's the cost of a beginning teacher.
It's a teacher
It is.
position.
It is.
And I'm not saying this to redig up the past, but every time you lose 45, 50, it's positions that you're losing, which term out into programs that you're losing, whether it's Spanish or French or whatever you talk about. It becomes a program. And I know the towns are going to ride in on this in a minute, but
But
just so people will know.
This is a very difficult one when it does come to budget. And for our students who become homeless, we understand completely why they want to stay in the home school where this happened. But the big concern is the funding and trying to find that in a budget that's very, very tight. The other one is regional transportation. We are required by state law, because we are a regional school district, to transport students who live 2 or more miles from their school, and we are reimbursed for students who live 1.5 miles or more from their school. The challenge of that is that we have to do the buses whether there are kids on them or not. And this is particularly evident here at the high school, because we must bus them, that is the law, But if you come here in the morning or you're here in the afternoon, you'll see that some buses are full. And you will see that some buses are not full. They're partially full. I spoke to Karen Villanueva this morning. There's a bus that's supposed to have 48, 60 students on, it's 28. And as our juniors get their licenses, the ridership goes down, 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 down. K to 8, our buses are full and they're used. But at the high school, we're required to have regional transportation, and it's also very, very expensive. In addition to that, reimbursement is supposed to be 100%, and it doesn't even come close to that. So what we're paying out of pocket for busing, you know, by statute, subject to appropriation, should be paid for by the state, particularly where we are required to transport in the first place. Any of the town systems around here don't even have to offer transportation unless they choose to, and in addition to that, they may charge for it. And you will find most towns do that now because a lot of parents drive their kids to school. If you, even our schools K to 8, you take a look, you'll see many, many kids are not riding the school bus. This is a problem because we're spending lots of money that could probably serve students better. So that's a real concern for us. And the other one is that we have English language learners in Whitman-Hanson, and the population has grown. Several years ago, we just had a handful, 6, 8, maybe 10 students. We now have, Kyle, what, 40?
40,
Yeah, 40, and as a result of that, we are required to have English language, ESL teachers for our English language learners, which is very important. We're required by state law to do this. We have 2 people employed to work with our English language learners. However, we also receive no compensation from the state for that as well. There is a federal Title III grant, but Title III federal money will only go to school systems that have more than 100 English language learners. So unfunded, underfunded mandates, those are the 2 that stand out, or 3 that stand out to me, is we've got McKinney-Vento, providing services for English language learners. We love having them here, but it's also, it goes into the operational budget. And regional transportation is also a concern. For also FY19, we are concerned that there will be decreases in federal grants. We receive federal grants at Whitman-Hanson that help supplement our programs to a significant extent. Our Title I grant program is used at Conley School, Duval School, Whitman Middle School, and Title I funding is for students who should be regular education, general education students who should be working at grade level but are not. So in the 2 elementary schools, they pay for reading specialists and tutors. At the Whitman Middle School, it's more of a general academic support person. We get these funds because of low income numbers. That's how it works out. This year, our grant is just around $350,000, and it is possibly slated to decline based on the budget that the current administration has proposed, which would have the Title I dollars follow the students. One of the concerns we have is with Title I, we are required to contact every independent school, private school, parochial school that Whitman and Hanson children go to in the areas that are served. And then we ask them, and we're required by federal law to do so, if they would like some of our Title I money. So private programs may have access to our funding. Because of the program we have, that hasn't happened to us. We write to them and they say no thank you. However, for some programs, I was talking to colleagues in Weymouth, where they have school-wide programs, a lot of their dollars go right out the door to private and parochial schools. So big concerns with Title I, and concerns that if the dollars follow the student, they're going to follow them right out of the doors of the Whitman-Hanson Regional School District. We also have a Title IIA grant. It's called Teacher Quality Grant. This is a grant we see diminishing over time. It is now at about $86,000. It is used to fund part of a teacher. It's called class size reduction, and then we use the rest for professional development. Our professional development operating budget, per the number of students we have and teachers, is one of the lowest in the state. We have taken from that budget in order to keep teachers in classrooms. So that's Title IIA. This is one of the federal grants that the Trump administration is looking to eliminate. Very concerned about that. We have Title IV, which is a grant that we got this year for $8,000. So we use it, we're using it for our social emotional network, and also to help with curriculum. But those grants are all at risk, as well as our Community Learning Center, 21st Century Community Learning Centers grant, which last year, you remember Maureen Leonard came and talked to you about. Since 2012, Whitman-Hanson has received close to $800,000 in grants for after-school programs for at-risk high school students. That grant is also on the chopping block, so it's important we pay attention for that. And then the next one is IDEA. This is the grant that we use to supplement special education. And this year, Kyle, it's a little under $1 million.
991,000 down 10,000.
And that's a grant that's also been on decline over the last few years. The arrangement with the federal government is that 40% of state costs for special education should come from the federal government. What it is 16%. So we were talking the other day, what if it really would be 40%? That would be fantastic. But it's 16%, it's supposed to be 40. Those are decreases in federal grants. We rely on them. Without those costs have to go into the operating budget. So yes, Fred.
Just a quick question. 16% of what the federal government's supposed to be giving us?
Yeah, they're supposed to be giving us 40%, and they give 16.
And that's been going on for?
Long time. I've been going to Washington now 3 years. And I think it goes, Kyle, you probably know better. How long it's been 16% for a long time. Yeah, it's never been 40.
I mean, do we turn around and try and get our congressmen and senators over here and put them on the?
Absolutely. That's when I do the
advocacy.
advocacy.
They've been failing us, obviously.
When I've done advocacy in Washington, that's exactly what we bring to them. And I think we need to do that because one of the other things we're going to talk to you about are the rising costs of special education. And that's a good lead-in to Kyle. If you just talk a little bit about that, it'd be great.
Yeah, I think with special education, it's the fluidity of what it is. So as you pass your budget and know who your out-of-district students are, what your costs are, and then your budget passed, those numbers now change because we have students who do move-ins, and we're responsible for every student that lives within Whitman-Hanson here. So we've had a few students already this year that we have concerns about the second they walk in the door, and we need to give them services to support them. All that comes with a cost. And so I think smartly, we've been talking a little bit about programming in the district and how to increase programming, which has a cost as well, but it also allows us to have less students go out of district, more students come back to district to be in their community, but there's some upfront cost to that. So it's the fluidity that every district deals with of these outside costs that you didn't plan for, you didn't budget for, because you wouldn't have. Those people weren't here. But the increase of mental health issues in the schools across the country, we're seeing it. We talked about it this week as we talked about the pillars, and I led our discussion with every child every day, and we talked about interventions and what that looks like, both financially but also in support of students, what that looks like for all our students that we want to keep in district and best serve them academically, social, emotionally, and how do we reach them, how do we support them the best way. All that comes with an increased price, a cost, and we're doing so, I think, with less of the social emotional piece, the less of the social workers, the less of different pieces that can support parents and families. So it's really a tricky conundrum to put money out first, to make sure we're supporting everyone, to make sure we're, hope that we're getting an investment back by doing that. And so that's kind of where we are right now.
And maybe, Kyle, if you could give the people here this evening a sense of what an out-of-district cost would be, maybe the range of what we're seeing.
Yeah, so I would say in general, Massachusetts number would be anywhere from about $40,000 to $50,000 per student up to $350,000. I've heard some that are a little higher than that at Crystal Springs and other places, but about $350,000 would be a residential student with a lot of services in a specialized program. But 100,000 maybe average is what we're seeing.
Right.
So we have that number that's, tilting over 40 at this point. We'd love to get that number down with the right services. Part of that is a long step into that. We're looking to kind of profile kids, what kids are out of district, that we could create a program to bring back, not just one student, but bring back a group of students and support them for what they need. Also, make sure that we're not losing students that we could service just because they have a disability that we don't have current programming for. So those costs are real.
They are, and Circuit Breaker helps, but it doesn't solve the problem. And Circuit Breaker is the state program that looks at costs over about $40,000 and then looks at the amount over $40,000 and reimburses at this point. I think it's about, what, 75%?
It's,
Last year, I just heard it's going to go down to 63% reimbursement.
Okay, so 63%.
there
So
as well.
we get, it does help. It doesn't solve the problem.
Kyle, to talk about what you're talking about in the investment up front, I want to get it more into layman's terms, so you correct me as I go through it. It's going to give you a little handle on predictability, but the predictability is on the first day of school. The unpredictability of this is as the district moves into the school year and the students start juggling from other schools is where your unpredictable costs come from. Because when we talk about average being 40 to 50,000, but up to 300,000, I have this question asked to me quite frequently. How in the world are you responsible for that happening? Can you explain that briefly?
Yeah, I don't know how I can explain how we're responsible. We are responsible, and that's the law. But I think from the lens of all kids are ours, and we have to meet all kids' needs. We can meet X number of kids' needs inside district. But you have kids who come into our district who have multiple disabilities, multiple handicaps, who may never come back to our community because their need is so severe that they need to be supported in a district that's unique to them. Kind of where I think the rub is, where we can do a little better and predict some programming, is the students who are have a disability that is meetable by adding some pieces to what we're currently doing. I think we have a great base to our programs. I think we have some really great programs here. But what they look like in meeting everyone's needs, I think they're somewhat limited. So as we add on positions, yes, definitely positions, it's one of those things that's a leap of faith a little bit for a school committee in any town, that we need to hire these 2 teachers and this social worker and these 3 paras, but we'll bring 5 kids back, and you start doing the math, and if you can really bring those 5 kids back, you just save $200,000, whatever, and I'm making up numbers, but you get to that place, but it is trying to make sure you're not just adding to add, but adding to make sure that we can meet the needs of kids.
I think what I'm saying is the predictability piece is if you outsource a student and say the outsourcing costs $60,000 and we have 5 or 6 of them, you would take a look at hiring and adding a teacher where someone might be saying to you, why are you adding staff when we already have a budget that's over where we are? Well, you're trying to save part of the $300,000 and control it in-house. Is kind of what I'm talking about.
And I would say,
So that's why you would add a staff position where somebody might say, I thought we had a freeze on hiring.
Yeah.
absolutely, and that's always twofold for me. It's exactly what you just said, and the other side of it is put all the costs aside. It's one of our kids. We want them back in our community whenever we can
Right.
have them back in our community. That's what we owe to them. So it's both pieces.
Right. Because it gets, we sit here and we talk about this, and lots of times we have people going, what are they talking about? Because it's complicated at times to figure this out. So,
And I think the other piece to bring out that many times people don't understand is that we have an early intervention program. So some students begin at Whitman-Hanson as early as age 3, identified as not meeting benchmarks early on in their lives, and with the hope that with intervention, they will be able to catch up to their peers. We have students who stay at Whitman-Hanson until age 22. So although many people understand the traditional sort of K to 12 or PK to 12, there are a percentage of students in the district who are here from age 3 all the way up to age 22. And I just think it's important to bring that out because I think folks are often surprised by that. And we have some really good programs for students ages 18 to 22 that get them to the workplace, they get career skills, which I think can benefit them well when they finish the programs here. The last piece I wanted to mention are just capital expenses. And there are a number of them. Working with Ernie Sandland, we have a matrix that we work on. We're constantly fine-tuning it. But one of the, in addition to the closing of McQuon and sort of the reorganization of Indian Head and Hanson Middle, also coming up very closely is the Whitman Middle School. And as recently as just a few weeks ago, we met with officials at Town Hall in Whitman to begin looking at what does that mean. The Whitman Middle School is aging. It was built in the early 70s. It has multiple roofs. The heating system is antiquated, and that's something we're going to be looking at in future planning as well. The way it works with the School Building Authority is that we submit with the town of Whitman a statement of interest indicating we have a building that is requiring either replacement or renovation. Then the School Building Authority looks at that. If they believe it has merit, they will move that on. The town then has to fund a feasibility study. The feasibility study, which is probably close to $750,000, really looks at what do you do with that building? Do you renovate? Do you replace? What are the systems? Make a recommendation. That then goes back to the School Building Authority. You start plans. You look at what it's going to cost to move forward. And that is right outside our door as a project that we're going to be looking at, and I know we've spoken about that. So I just wanted to bring that up tonight as well, that in addition to the things, we have to constantly maintain our facilities, make sure that they are where they need to be, and our facilities subcommittee does a nice job working with Christine and Ernie, really moving forward with that. So just a quick summary, we looked at the FY 2018 budget that we have now. It's a tight, more or less, level service budget. Our strategic plan identifies things that we believe are right for teaching and learning and for our students here in Whitman-Hanson. And then when we look at a level services budget, that's just doing next year what we're doing today, and we're looking probably, and this is just a guess, at a 5 to 6% increase, and that would be adding none of the things in the strategic plan. And then some of the unknowns are what will be the cost savings of taking the McQuon School offline, and how will we reallocate those resources to be able to achieve some of the items that are in the strategic plan. So I'm happy to answer any questions. I know, Christine, you want to weigh in on any of this before we do questions?
We're just, there's so many unknowns at this point. I mean, I talked to GIC today asking, we get the assessment for our retired teachers, and that's a guarantee that that's going to go up as well, because we had 8 teachers retire last year, but they can't even give me a rough estimate until December. And I know that we haven't got our actuarials from Plymouth County yet either. So I don't know when we can expect those. So those are 2 costs that we know will be cost more than increases, but we don't know what that is today.
Right. So we're happy to answer any questions that you might have. And as we move through the budgetary process, of course, our numbers will get tighter and tighter, but I think we've done this a number of years, that saying 5 to 6% just for level services is pretty close.
And again, this is not 5 to 6% on the assessment.
No, that wouldn't
This
be
is
enough.
5 to 6% on the overall budget.
That's correct.
Ruth, just
Sure.
as just a guy that's always looking at straight numbers, if I have this right, that would be a rough increase in dollars, and I get the fact
Yeah.
that it's a very moving
Right.
target, of about 2.7 million. It's kind of where
Sounds
I'm
about
coming
right.
down
That's
to.
about right.
Yeah.
And where we were about a year ago was 2.9
Yeah.
before anything was voted on of using
Right,
your own
so that's what
EMD.
you're looking at, just
So
keep-
after last year of coming up with every possible scenario to close that gap,
Yeah.
we're back to where we started.
because costs keep rising.
Correct.
Absolutely. I was talking to a collaborative director, we just talked about special ed. They're looking to increase their costs by 6% for out-of-district. You just want to throw your hands up and say, sure, but we have students who need those programs.
That's
And
right.
you're exactly right, that is the frustration. Just to try to stay level requires a lot more money. So
Frank,
now we hear from the towns.
Mike?
I guess what I would add at this early juncture, and Ruth, I think that you touched upon it. I think that people that have spoken have touched upon it, that we really don't know where we're going quite yet.
Yeah.
In terms of our anticipated revenues, in terms of some of our expenses. Most of our expenses at this point, I think, are static, but I can't guarantee that. Unfortunately, I was not at the first meeting of this group. It's my intention to be at all the ensuing meetings of this group. I have reached out to my staff in terms of trying to get some figures together, but you know, again, as was brought up here, and as I'm sure Frank can attest, you know, it's kind of herding cats at this point, and I don't want to offer up anything prematurely, either in the negative or the positive.
Sure.
I think Christine and I have a very good working relationship, and we're in constant contact. And I think that that relationship was born out of the fact we were able to come to an agreeable solution to get both the school and the two municipalities through this particular fiscal year. I would imagine that will continue. I guess my question is, and it may not be something that can be answered this evening, is what do you need from me, and when do you need it? I mean, you probably like it tomorrow.
No, I don't think so. Yeah,
I'd be
yeah, I think what we really need is, you know, we want to be very transparent
As do we.
in terms of what our needs are. And I think that's really the point of meeting now. We don't want to say to you, like February 2nd, when we do our budget, oh, by the way, we need school adjustment counselors, full-day K. I think it's important to know what's going on, because we know we need to move forward. We know we need a new plan. And if we're looking for improving our funding base, then what we need from the communities are folks saying, well, the only way you're going to get it is by an override. Okay, if that's what it's going to be, it can't just be a school override, because I can guarantee it'll be a lesson in futility, because I've been there, done that. And we need everyone working together. So I think what we need is an understanding, if the communities are going to support education, they're going to not just support it from the district side, but they're going to support it from the community side as well. And that's really what we need, is an understanding of what's going to happen. We really, you know, we didn't really talk about revenue tonight, but clearly the increase in the operating assessment from the towns this year saved us. It absolutely saved us, because our funding from the state is exactly like this. We got essentially no increase at all whatsoever.
I don't want to say we kind of pulled that out of a hat.
It was a good hat.
Yeah, it was, you know, and Christine can attest to this, it had to do with some of the budgeting that we had assumed, and we had fortunately over-budgeted something. Actually, it was the health insurance. We had budgeted it 21%, which was the original horrible number that they threw out
Yeah.
at us, and built our budget off of that. And when it scaled back to 16, we were able to dip into that money to, you know, help get the school budget through this current fiscal year. Where that money comes from in 19, I don't know.
Well, that's why I think, that's why it's important to have the conversations, because by putting out here tonight, we're being, I think, very straightforward, saying, okay, we know this is what level service is going to cost, but these are all the other things that need to happen. And if this is what the communities want, then I think we need to work together as a cohesive unit. And if you start in October, you're going to be much better shape than if we start in March. And I think having that understanding, so I think that's more, what we need to know is, how are we going to work together if this is the priority?
And I think it's important to know, and I can only speak for the town of Hanson, but it's important for the school committee and the administration to know that, you know, our obligations have increased as well. That,
Sure, we know.
We've just settled our 5 contracts, and there have been increases, obviously.
Sure.
Both in wages and in other financial considerations. We are going through some changes in our staffing due to some attrition, and we're trying to look at the best ways to not only replace but augment, as you do in your programs. So I guess it may have been a little misleading for me to say that our expenses are static right now. We obviously obviously don't make commitments in terms of contracts without a relative degree of surety that we can sustain those. But again, those increases will take away from where we can spend or allocate other funds.
Sure.
So,
The assessment unknowns.
Huh?
The assessment unknowns
yeah,
that we've got, right? We just passed a town meeting an assessment article. So we're going to have some positions assessed. So if that comes back saying that we're short or we're not paying enough money to so-and-so, right?
yeah.
You know, there's that unknown number as well.
But what the chairman is alluding to, and not to get too far into it, but one of the unions, we have agreed to go through reclassification, so we may be looking at something in terms of higher adjustments than we've agreed to in this fiscal year, and I'm sure you can appreciate that sort of thing. So there are a few unknowns. Christine and I, we are looking at alternatives in terms of insurance going forward. Whether that makes sense or not, we'll probably figure out the next couple of weeks.
That's right.
And that really is a budget buster, as unfortunately we all found out in the last couple of years. But whether or not that, again, is something that makes sense in the long term, I've certainly seen communities jump into the GIC and achieve remarkable savings in the first year, only to have their expenses double or triple in the second year. So, again, we have to look more long-term at
That's
things
right.
than short-term. And it really is a challenge. It's a challenge to the school side, and it's a challenge to the municipal side. And, the only thing I can say, again, at this premature is the wrong word, this early juncture is the town of Hanson, through my administration and through the Board of Selectmen, we will try to participate and cooperate
Great.
to the best of our ability going forward within our constraints. And I know you appreciate our constraints, and we appreciate your constraints.
Great. Thank you, Mike.
Fred?
And just to, reiterate that, and not to beat up on any of our state reps, because I do want to offer them thanks for everything you've attempted to do for us in the past. Unsuccessfully last year, but you gave it a very good effort to try and lessen the burden anyways. When our funding from the state increases less than 0.5%, and a municipality is restricted by 2.5% plus new growth, and the state, their increase is 50-something% of our budget, we're gonna be in a hole. There's just no sense. It makes no sense. We're in a hole, period. And as much as we can restrain our costs, health insurance, what was the health insurance increase in the estimate that we gave for FY19? We just came out with, we're figuring the budget to go up about 5% or so.
Yeah, it would be like where it is this year. We'd look at that.
So if
12.
we're hit with a substantial health insurance increase, it just takes away everything that we can most
Exactly
possibly do.
right. Yeah,
And it's contractual, and we have no choice.
that's right.
We need, I don't know what the answer is, and, the minds in this room hopefully can help figure it out. Reallocation from the state, I know they've looked at the foundation formula, and I know that's gone really nowhere. But if we could get maybe a little push on that, just realizing, because we're not the only ones in this position. Seems every town, everywhere suffers with the same problem.
I think one of my disappointments is, and this is on the state level, and it's not leveled at our representatives. However, I've come from another community in which it was a regional school. Actually, I've served in 2 other communities which had a regional school. And my biggest concerns, well, I guess it goes beyond regional, it's really any school district, is the cost or the lack of reimbursement when choice students are taken in. And I don't really know what your percentage is. I know that a lot of districts have been scaling back in terms of taking those students in, which makes an awful lot of sense. Some people might look very quickly and say, well, it's a revenue source. Well, it's not, because your per student expenses far exceed what the state reimburses. And again, my disappointment is the fact that the Commonwealth has never really adjusted those figures, and I'm really not sure. I've looked at it with school committees, I've looked at it with representatives in other communities. I really don't know what it would take to try to make those adjustments. And I'm sure, I know that you know this much better than I do, but I don't know when the last time they really took a serious look and tried to get it even close to what, you know, a district like ours or a singular district is expending. It baffles me that there's been no adjustments. I mean, I'm happy to have you enlighten me in terms of your experience.
It hasn't changed. And I think the other one that has been even more difficult for us is the charter school assessment. We got whacked with that this year, what, $200,000?
About $200,000 from last
So
year.
by the time we got our Chapter 70 money and they whacked us for that, we were exactly where we were in FY17. Nope, not any really new dollars at all.
Nope,
Nope.
actually in the hole.
Yep.
Mike, I think part of the issue here is a lot of the people on this committee have seen it, and a lot of people, with even yourself, you've been in other towns, and Frank has been here for many years. I don't think you can rely on the state or the federal government to fix the problem we have in this regional school system.
No, I
If
don't
you
disagree with
think
that.
we're gonna look, if anyone thinks that we're gonna be looking through that lens for that dollar, I think we're wrong. I think we need to come up, this committee and both towns need to come up with a long-term goal, because overrides are done. If you saw the last override, it failed miserably. So I think we need to become more to the reality of the fact that maybe we need to say, one of our long-term goals would be a commitment from the towns of 2% per year over and beyond the assessment. I'm just throwing figures
Yeah,
out.
and I guess-
And I know it's hard, I'm trying to pull a rabbit out of our hat, but we need a long-term goal to build the base and fix this problem. We're not gonna fix this problem, state dollars or federal dollars, not right away.
No, and I don't disagree with that, and I guess what I would say to that is, why can't the two things be done in concert? Now, you know, you've made the statement, and I agree with the statement, that, you know, $30,000, $40,000 here and there, that's a person, that's a program. Now, although we can't rely on the state or the federal government to fill the gaps that you've been describing here this evening, you know, if we were, the towns, if whomever were able to get a certain amount of money that comes a little closer to covering those costs, then maybe you've saved yourself $40,000, $80,000, and you've saved 2 positions. So I'm not suggesting that the panacea, that the magic bullet is going to come from the state or the federal government, but why can't that be part of it? And I don't know to what degree, since I'm still relatively new in this town, I don't know what degree there's been a concerted, joint, collaborative effort between the municipal side and the educational side in terms of putting the, you know, the arm on our representatives, and I mean that in almost only in love. However, you know, it would be a much stronger voice, if such voice hasn't existed in the past, if you've got the municipal side speaking in favor of some of the things that you need from the state, from the feds. And again, I know that's not the entire solution, but it can be part of it.
I think it is part of
I don't
it.
see any one magic box of money coming.
No,
from the
perfect
town,
example,
From the state,
yep.
from the feds, from whatever.
Yep.
But maybe there's little boxes that we
Well,
put together.
one example is Chapter 70. Chapter 70 money is based on an antiquated formula. It doesn't take into account the rising costs of special ed that happened since it was made. It doesn't take into account many of the things, health insurances and what's happened to them. So that's a state issue that needs to be resolved. I think this charter school piece that we deal with is a huge challenge for us. We don't have any control that I can figure out over charter schools. We have about 30 students who go. Last time I looked at it, 29 of them had never set foot in the Whitman-Hanson Regional School District. So don't tell me they were opting out of something because they didn't even know what it was. They had never been there. They went there for other reasons. And we lose dollars that could stay in Whitman-Hanson because of that. And there's a lot of federal funding out there about, or federal talk out there about voucher programs and all of those, and they are only going to take public dollars out of schools. So I think there is a conversation that needs to happen at the state and at the federal level. But Bob's right, it's also a local issue. We look at the numbers for these two towns. What people pay in Whitman and Hanson for schools is less than what people in surrounding towns are paying for schools. So I think you're looking at it federal, state, and local to try and move forward.
Go ahead, Josh.
Yeah.
If you don't mind, there's a number of great issues that were raised. I want to kind of address a few of them, maybe give a quick update on where we're at statewide for our budget purposes. We're going through the same thing. So for the record, I'm Josh Cutler on behalf of Jackie from Rep. Deal's office and Senator Brady. Thank you for coming and inviting me. I was good to be here. I think it was June. I was at the last meeting, and I appreciate you guys doing this. It speaks well of you that you are doing this and working together. A few things, just a couple. So in terms of the bigger budget picture for us, so you understand our perspective, so we're under the same kinds of constraints that you're facing. We passed a $40 billion budget this fiscal year, FY 18, which is an increase of about 1.7%. So a tight budget, okay, 1.7% increase in growth, an increase in new revenues. Of that, basically $1 billion comes off the top for Mass Health, for healthcare costs. So any new revenue that we're getting, the vast majority of it is going to healthcare costs. So obviously that's a big concern. Same with you guys. It's no different, just numbers are a little bit bigger. So of that 1.7% increase, we still managed to increase some of the line items that you were concerned about. For instance, unrestricted general government aid, which is the main source of revenue to cities and towns, went up $40 million. Chapter 70 went up $119 million. Now we can chat about the formula, and I'll be happy to talk about that in a moment. I love to talk about the formula, as you guys know. Regional school transportation, it still went up by $1 million over last year, even though it's not where it should be. Special ed circuit breaker went up by $4 million. So we're taking whatever we have of new revenue, we're putting it towards these accounts in as much as we can. So I just want to emphasize that we certainly recognize the difficult spot you guys are in. I can tell you a lot of my colleagues are former school committee members, former selectmen, former town officials, so we get it. I was myself, and I know Senator Brady and Rep. Deal were as well. So we understand that. As far as the actual formula goes, I know we've talked about this in the past, and I don't want to lose my audience here with a whole diatribe on the formula, but there's a lot of discussions right now about reopening the formula. My concern, as I've expressed in the past, is that be done in a way that's going to be to our benefit and not to our detriment. As you have said, schools like Whitman-Hanson do get a significant portion of their funds, of their state, their budget from state funding, much higher than any of the surrounding communities. So my concern would be that there are communities that look at what we're getting and have envy. And yes, Fred, did you want to?
Now, just to address that real quick.
Sure.
We get a larger percentage, but at the same time, we're 7th from the bottom in per pupil spending when you combine state revenues and our town revenues. Our town revenues are perhaps, according to the foundation formula, a little bit deficient, but we meet the minimum guidelines. Okay, we're 7th from the bottom, but you're saying we're getting all this money from the state. Then you take our mandates.
Yep. Well, hold on. Let me come back to that because we're getting off the topic. So,
but okay.
I understand. No, I'm on the same page.
I'm just
But I
saying-
think you have to understand. Okay, your enrollment. You have fewer students than we did last year, but you're getting more money. Now, for a school district in another part of the state, they're going to look at that and they're going to say, that's not fair. I think we should be getting more. So I'm just telling you that reopening the formula, it has to be done delicately.
They take the
not
commercial
necessarily to our
tax
advantage.
base and they consider us the same as in Braintree. Braintree has South Shore Plaza, et cetera. If you look at the foundation formula and you read how they weight commercial tax base, we're getting penalized. We don't have a commercial tax base here.
So we're, suburban towns, and again, all the towns in my district are in the same boat, essentially, in the sense of not being at foundation. So in other words, we rely on the minimum per pupil increment to see any increase in funding year to year. So all of my towns, and frankly, most of the South Shore towns are in that same boat. So they rely on that $25, $30, $35 per pupil minimum increment in order to see any increase in Chapter 78 year to year. Now, as someone mentioned already, we actually did succeed this year in increasing, the governor proposed $25 per pupil, and we did raise that up to $30 per pupil for the FY18 budget. Not quite as good as the year before when we got up to 55, but still a nice change. In past years, he proposed it at 20. So obviously any increase is welcome. So that was, you know, a small victory. So a couple other points, and I'd be happy to chat more, Fred, with you about, I appreciate your passion for this, and we've had a lot of good discussions. The mandates, I think a big one, and it was mentioned just recently, is charter schools, and I think we sort of dodged one in last fall. Whitman-Hanson is netting out a loss of about $400,000 in charter schools.
That's right.
And that's a significant amount of money. That eclipses many of the other items that were talked about. So that is something that is a serious concern, and you know, I don't know what's to be done about that. But if we'd expanded charter schools, obviously, you know, people were considering last fall, that would have gone up by a considerable amount. As far as what's going on at the state level, I mean, you know, there's a lot of things, a lot of balls in the air in our area. There's some longer-term issues that we're looking at. I think, you know, as I talked about at the last meeting, you know, I'd love to come up here and tell you you're going to have more local aid next year, but you know, it's going to be fairly similar to this year. You know, we're going to see some modest increases in UGA, unrestricted general government aid, and we'll be in the same boat we're in with Chapter 70 because, again, the enrollment is flat. It's not going up. It's going down. So we're going to be back in the boat of the minimum per pupil increment as our main source of getting any increase. And the fight is going to be, you know, it's going to come in at 20. We're going to fight to get it above 50. And depending on the revenues, we're going to meet somewhere in between. Now, you know, as you know, this has been a cause for me ever since I was elected and I came to my first meeting. You guys gave me a stern whipping about this, and I appreciate that, and I've taken it to heart. And, you know, I have a bill, in fact, that came up for a hearing last month to set the foundation for the minimum per pupil increment at $50 per pupil. And that's something that, you know, I'm trying to work on because I recognize that doing this fight every year is not fun, and we want to have some certainty and cost certainty so that you guys at least will know. Yes, Mr. Chairman.
I was going to ask you that, Josh. What happened to that bill? It just hasn't come up and made its full round yet?
So it had a hearing for the Education Committee. I testified. Actually, Senator Brady was right to my left. We testified together, and it's still in the committee. So that's where it's at right now.
So it's just sitting in committee?
It's still being reviewed by the committee, exactly.
Just so everyone will know,
yeah.
because I've had the fortunate time of knowing what goes on in the legislature, and by Hickey Associates, you know where I'm at with that.
Yes.
How many bills come up? People think like there's 30 bills that come up. There's thousands of bills.
I have 30 bills. There's like 6,000 bills.
That's what I'm saying. So the 6,000 bills to be considered in a year, that bill could physically sit for 2 to 3 years.
So every committee, you know, there's a number of committees. Each committee gets referred to bills that fit into that subject matter. Some of the smaller committees might have 30 or 50 bills. Some of the larger ones, like Education or Judiciary, I think has 700 bills. So, you know, it's a significant amount of, and each bill has to have a hearing, and there's a process for each, and each one gets reviewed. But obviously only a small number of them actually make it all the way to the finish line and, you know, reach the governor's desk. A lot of that has to do, obviously, with finances and money and the fiscal climate.
How can we help you with
Well,
that bill?
With that particular bill, you know, I think communicating your support to the Education Committee and the members, especially the chairs, is important. You know, it's a tough argument to make for the same reasons Fred and I were just going at it there. It's hard because, you know, we're battling against other districts that have needs as well, and they are coming in, and it's you know, it's a challenge. The pie, fighting over the size of pie is never going to be a winning victory. We have to increase the size of the pie, and that is the only way we're really going to see any long-term sustainable change. We can debate and, you know, what the formula is and so forth, but we're going to be pitting one community against the other, and that's never going to really be a workable solution.
Real quick, basic
Yes.
math.
Yes, sir.
We get about $25 million Chapter 70 funds.
Correct.
Revenues increased 1.7% last year. That would give us a $425,000 increase if you did it based upon the increase in revenues.
Right. So that's because of the foundation formula. As you
No,
mentioned.
I'm just saying, if you
okay.
just took 1.7% of the
Right.
Chapter 78 from the year before, increased it by that, we'd see about $425,000. We actually saw about 112, 115,000?
Not even.
It's 24.5. I don't have the.
24,000.
It's a little less than that.
It's 24,552,000.
Oh, yeah, 24 million. I think.
Yeah.
Okay,
So
so
but that
what I'm saying is the increase that we saw at $30 per pupil
right.
doesn't come close to the 1.7%
Right, correct.
revenue increase.
Correct, and that's because of the foundation formula, and that's because of the basically it has to do mostly with enrollment. The communities that saw the increases in the foundation formula are the communities that have fast-growing enrollments. That's the bottom line. 200 plus school districts around the state rely on that minimum per pupil increment. So we're not hardly alone. All 3 communities in my town, as I mentioned, a lot of communities around here, because of the same reasons. Enrollment is flat, and because of some of the flaws in the foundation budget, as Superintendent pointed out.
Wouldn't it be more equitable to take the increase, divide it up per pupil, and then give that type of a per pupil increase as opposed to, obviously, it's way off.
So I would love to change the formula. I'm all for that. And in terms of what I call it UGA, and no one knows what I'm talking about. Probably Mike's the only one who knows what I'm talking about. Unrestricted general government, and Frank, unrestricted general government aid used to be called lottery aid, okay? That did go up by, I believe, 4%, 4.3%. So that went up more significantly. So that went up at a greater pace than our actual budget did. But because that's not tied to the same kind of formula that the Chapter 70 formula is, okay? So our hands are tied to some extent. We can put a lot more money into that line item, okay, the Chapter 70 line item. Only a little bit is going to trickle down to Whitman-Hanson because of the way the formula is and because how it treats enrollment figures. That is a determining factor. Again, our enrollment is either flat or even declining. I don't know the exact numbers.
It's declining.
It's declining.
Slightly.
Yeah, slightly
Slightly,
declining.
though.
And that's
Slightly.
the case, that's not unusual. I see that in Duxbury, I see that in Pembroke, and I'm sure it's a case nearby. So putting more money into it isn't going to work unless the formula is tweaked. That's why I've put all my efforts in terms of Chapter 70, not into changing the formula necessarily, but into changing the per pupil increment, because that is the only way we've actually seen an increase.
Right, but if you had a per pupil increment that was more relative to the increase in overall revenues, it would be more fair and equitable, is all I'm saying.
I agree. We are in agreement, sir. I know there's a lot more. Let me wrap up a few more things, and I'd be happy to sit down and let you guys do your thing. So obviously, lots going on. We're dealing with criminal justice reform, the marijuana bill, implementing that has been a major focus. Our own budget time frame really, is not getting underway until we just wrapped up our budget. In fact, just yesterday, or what day is today? Thursday. Yesterday, we were finishing up veto overrides, so trying to restore some funding to some areas that were vetoed by the governor, which we did do, and a little bit of good news for Hanson and some Wampatuck Pond funding, which Selectman McGann had brought forward. So that's what's going on in terms of us. We'll be doing our budget process. Really, that doesn't get underway until January when we do the consensus revenue forecast. And again, we'll have the Ways and Means hearings, which I now sit on, and we'll talk more about that as we get going. But I would suspect we're going to be kind of in the same boat we were in this past year. The only other things I wanted to mention, to maybe end on a little bit of a good note. Well, before I get to my good note, I want to put 2 issues on your horizon to think about, because you're concerned about the long term here. There's a couple ballot questions that are going to be on the ballot probably next fall. One is going to be the so-called Fair Share Amendment, which has to do with income taxes and a so-called millionaire's tax, they're calling it. And one is potentially a sales tax cut. So you have sort of opposite factors there. One might increase the income tax for people in the 1 million plus bracket, and one would cut the sales tax from 6.25 to 5%. So both of those bear watching. They would have a significant impact on revenue in different ways, and it still has to be worked out. But if one were to pass and not the other, it could be a big shift in one direction for the state. So please keep that on your radar screens. The last piece I wanted to end on, just to end on a positive note, is just yesterday we did get our September revenue forecast. So we have a bit of a different, every month we have to watch the benchmarks at the state level, because unlike city or town, our budget is much more in flux. It depends on global factors, what's going on, what did President Trump say has an impact on the budget and revenue, withholding tax, what level it comes in at, and so forth. Certain months of the year are more important for the annual budget than other months, excuse me. So September actually is a big month for the state. It's the 4th biggest revenue number for the 12 months. And our budget numbers just came in yesterday, and they're above benchmark by $124 million, which if you've been following closely, is the first kind of piece of good news we've had in a little bit, because all throughout the spring, our revenue benchmarks were trailing. And so the predictions that the experts made, we were falling short. And so that was causing us to have to make some cuts. And again, we didn't make cuts in the areas that impact you guys, but we had to make some tough cuts. So to see that number sort of reversing is still early, and I want to stress that, but it was a really positive and encouraging sign.
Was it a wash? Was it a wash from what we?
So as of year to date, we're 124 million over benchmark.
Oh, okay,
so for this year, we're in the black by that amount.
Josh, is there ever a time, and I know that all the committees hear from all the reps, and that's your job, that they physically would like to hear from a school committee or have someone come in testify and talk to them? Because we'd be more than willing to do that.
On which of those 10 things would
Well, I would, you know, you could throw a dart at any one of the 10, but I'd want to look at the one that was the most revenue for a district.
We'll send Fred.
I think Fred needs to come up. I can be a sidekick. I mean, you know, so there's hearings. Okay, so there's a fixed hearing. People can come in and testify. And Ruth has come in and testified about last year. We had a nice, or was it 2 years
Charter
ago? Maybe
schools,
a
2
charter
years
school
ago.
issue.
Yeah.
And I would encourage all of you. I'll even arrange for your parking if you want to come up and come in. And I'll give you a nice personal tour, and I'll buy you a
Drove
coffee
me
even
home.
for you,
I
Fred.
remember that.
And so I would encourage that. Failing that, you can write letters or send emails. So there's certain times of the year where that's important when there's hearings. Obviously during the budget cycle, the budget season, that's another important time. Again, that's February, March, we're having hearings, and I sit on Ways and Means now, which is helpful. So, go travel around the state. That's helpful. But, anytime, I mean, whenever there's an issue that comes up, there's a whole foundation budget review commission that met and has recommendations. And again, nothing's going to significantly change until something significantly changes. And
Where are the postings, Jeff? So are they online? I know I've done some automotive. I've come
Jeff?
to the State House, Jeff. I've come to the State House and testified on some automotive stuff.
I always get called Rep. Coulter because he's from Kingston. But I'm sorry, go ahead. What was that?
I take it.
I said that I've come and testified at the State House on some automotive stuff.
Yes.
But usually it's because we have a lobbyist and, Hickey and
Right.
Associates calls and says, Bob, can you come in? Blah, blah, blah. But
And there's folks for the regional school. There's a regional school caucus. There's a school superintendents have a person. Every group has folks that do help, and they help us. They help us navigate. Make sure the important issues are getting, that we're addressing. So.
But is there a place I can go look at a website to see what hearings are when?
So MASC, the Mass Association of School Committees, would be one place. The Mass Municipal Association is really the best.
MMA, yeah.
Yeah, in fact, we just had a meeting over in Marshfield. Mike was there, and Frank was there to talk about municipal finance issues. So that was last week. My time just feels like it's flying by. 2 weeks ago. So really, Mass Municipal Association would be the number one, and for school committee issues, MASC
Okay.
would be what I would
Thank you.
recommend.
Thank you for coming this evening.
Yeah, no, a pleasure. I love to debate and talk about this stuff, and I appreciate what you're doing. And I'm obviously here until kickoff, hopefully.
Kickoff's pretty quick. We
Yeah, it's like-
agreed in the beginning when we set the stage for these meetings, it'd be an hour and a half, and we're about 13 minutes short of that, so I'm sure that Frank, would you like to chime in? What do you think about my 2 or 3% a year over the assessment to build the base?
I think we have to face a couple of realities. One of them is that the demands that are put on the state budget, not only from the schools, but from every other human services area, is not going to lighten up. And with federal funding, the great big question mark on it, we may do well just to hold our own there. This is a local problem. For me, the concept is alien. The state taxes individuals, collects the money, and then distributes the money. So you would think if we're putting all that money in every week or biweekly in our paychecks and in all the other taxes that we make, we should be seeing it come back to us. Yet this is apportionment process that just doesn't work that way. We were fortunate enough, and I vividly remember our push to regionalize and what we were offered to do that, and we got what we were promised. The problem is we were unable to sustain it. So as our budget continues to grow 3, 4, 5, 6% a year, and our revenue is capped at 2.5, and I emphasize that's a self-imposed cap. The state adopted 2.5. The voters decided we want a limit, but the voters have the opportunity to change that. Our community is what we make of it, what we put into it. The fixed costs are similar whether we're in the school district or whether we're in Hanson or we're in Whitman. We all see those same costs. So we have to decide collectively what we want our community to look like. We seem to have a lot of support for public safety. I can't remember the last time a budget for police or fire came up where it wasn't funded at the request. I can remember a lot of back of the room during town meetings with Ruth and her predecessor and saying, let's make a deal to get this thing done. And it's because of the size of the budget. So we have to look at it and say, are we satisfied with what our tax dollars are producing? Are we satisfied with the system we have? Well, frankly, I'm not. And I don't think anybody should be. There is nothing of greater value to us than the next generation. We have an obligation to provide our children and our grandchildren with the education they need to survive in this new world. And it means making some sacrifices. And we need to be talking about it right now. And people need to know right now that we're not talking about a 2.5% increase because we can raise taxes 2.5%. You know, I had a conversation with a member of the Finance Committee who was comparing us to another community, and why aren't we doing this and why aren't we doing that? And the answer is, our communities are different. We chose to live in communities that do not have a heavy commercial influence. And the consequence of that means we pay more. Because we don't have those other taxable entities to spread the cost across. And you know, neighboring towns, look at Rockland, look at Weymouth, and they're struggling too. But they're doing a lot better financially in terms of being able to raise that money per capita than we are. So we have to decide, are we prepared to make the financial sacrifices that are necessary to provide a quality school system? And we have to start talking about it now, because by the time we get to a budget, people need to understand what we're going to be asking for. You know, one of the things I'd hoped to be able to come in with tonight is some idea of what our numbers are. In order to do that, and in order to figure out what type of budget to propose, I need to know what the tax impact's going to be per household and throughout the community. But I can't answer that because I don't have the numbers yet. I don't have the growth numbers. I don't have the final valuations. Is it going to be more palatable to somebody if we say, yes, we're spending more money, but with the growth in values, it's more equitably distributed? That's a key to getting any kind of tax assessment passed. And let's not kid ourselves. Right now, we're talking about taxes.
So Frank, you're right, and so we said 2.7 million was just for level, right?
Well, that was just an
Right,
estimate,
just
but
for the
sure, yeah.
19. And I understand your points about growth, and I was getting to this point, I was going to say it. So we need to bring it down to what you're saying, Bob, to layman's terms, and I understand exactly what you're saying. We don't know the growth, but we know what we have now. We know how many households we have now, we know what we have now. So the question is what would be the impact to the average homeowner in approximate? We know what you need for level, and the difference between that, we haven't calculated, right, on the additional services.
Right, I mean, we can
Right,
do
yeah,
that, but sure.
We could do that. And I've heard that we're not, as a local, as citizens on both sides, contributing enough locally.
Let me make this easy for you. For the sake of Whitman, I can tell you in broad numbers, our 2.5 growth is going to be about $850,000.
That's about right.
Our new growth is going to be about $300,000. Do the math. That's $1.1 million. And we're talking 2,700,000, and then we're gonna take 59% of that, and that's what Whitman's share is if we're going to reach out to that number. And that translates into probably
670?
$180, $190 a household, over and above anything else we do.
Well, that's it. Isn't
And we
that what it's gonna
spent.
be per household?
Yeah.
If we can get to a close proximity, and knowing that this is the best guess, because there's a lot of variables out there that are gonna hit that, that impact that number. And we bring it down to basic saying, okay, we need each household to pitch in about this much per year in order to do these programs, it might have a better chance of getting through.
The problem, Jim, though, that just keeps us level.
Oh, I know, but I'm
We
saying.
need to
but I'm
come
saying-
up with a building base number.
And I understand that. So, but we also know, we can also learn from the past history of the last 5 years, what the costs have been per year on average, right? You said-
Pretty close.
so-
Pretty close, but it's raised. Fred?
The problem being, and to get to that number, the towns don't have the new growth plus 2.5% to be able to get there.
Right, that's what.
That's right.
So
Frank just
we
said
are
that.
looking at an override. And then, going on best-case scenario, the townspeople are good enough to fund us and fund additional programs and what we need. Not what we want, but what we need and what the kids need. And then the matter of sustaining it properly for years to come.
It's-
That's,
Exactly right.
I mean, that's what we're looking at. And we've been kicking the can down the road for too many years, and I think it's time to try and get it done.
Bob?
Here's my frustration. I've sat at this board for about 10 years. I've heard the same dialogue, the same arguments. My question is, how do we get to this? Do we need to streamline the committee? I hear what Jim's saying about numbers, which sound, at least you have a base. Frank's talked about numbers, at least we have a base. It seems to me that we're kind of going in a big circle. We always talk about the problems, but we've never got to how we're going to solve the problem. Does the state need to increase the state tax as opposed to decrease it? Do we need a new tax structure? Or do we need something dedicated, money dedicated to schools? This committee itself, I think, needs to be streamlined. I think it would be, if the town of Hanson, the town of Whitman can get their numbers together and you streamline the committee, I think the dialogue would probably be a little more effective. I understand we have to talk about what the needs are, but it's like, for me personally, I've heard the same thing as everyone else has over every single year explaining what our problems are. I think this committee right here is a little bit too big. I think it needs to be streamlined and try to come up with some ideas. I like where you were going as far as getting the numbers of houses and taxes, and Frank do the same thing. At least have an idea of what kind of money.
We're asking people to pay.
Right.
That's when it comes bottom line to.
The problem, one second, Fred, the problem is,
And I
Jim,
understand
we can ask them to
you
pay
can ask and
anything
might
they
not
want.
pay. I get it.
Anything that's over 2.5% per year triggers an automatic
I
override.
understand that, but
So we need to get a 5 or a 6-year plan.
I know. You're right.
We need a long-term goal to solve this problem. A short-term goal, every year we're bleeding to
We
death.
do that.
But we also have to let people.
That's
know
kind of what you're saying.
what they're going to lose if we don't. What's at risk if we don't finance this, right? That's it.
I know that we put together and we went forward to attempt an override a few years ago to fix this. I don't know that this committee needs to be streamlined. I think there's a lot of good thoughts that come out of this forum. I agree, we have to know what we're asking people to spend per month, per year on their additional taxes. I don't know that, given our needs, and I'd love to be wrong, but that the towns could shoulder the burden without an override. And ultimately, it is up to the taxpayers whether or not they want to go forward and properly educate the students of tomorrow. It's just that simple. I don't know where else the money can come from. I don't know that trying to put together a plan for next year and the year after given the uncertainty of budgets year after year and not knowing what the state is going to increase by, that you can depend on any of that.
You know, Fred, if you think about it, I mean, this is so hypothetical, please don't even think this is anything that's real. Let's say we identified a number, be it 3 million, be it $4 million, and we say, okay, right now, we're gonna raise taxes $4 million, and that money is going to go to the schools. And in the future, that money that we isolated and that increase will continue to go to the schools. The problem is, the following year, that grows by 2.5%.
That's exactly what I'm saying.
But it doesn't.
It needs
I
to
mean,
be
I don't want to say it's an insurmountable task, but it's going to take a lot of commitment and discipline on the part of all people involved to come up with a sustainable plan that will, and you know, the other uncertainty here, we're looking at student counts. Our population has gone down each of the last few years. And certainly the cost of delivering those services, notwithstanding the fixed cost, just the teacher salaries, the school books, the materials that you use, and the technical
Technology.
technology, all comes at a cost, and it all comes at an increasing cost. I wish I had an answer. I don't know what the answer is to make it sustainable, but we should be able to come up with a plan that says in 2019, we're going to do this, and in 2020, we're going to do this, and in 2021, we're going to do this. And then we present it. Now, the answer is going to come from a town meeting, and the voters are going to say what they're willing to do. And, you know, I've always said, whatever decision comes from town meeting is the right answer, whether I like it or not, whether I agree with it or not. Our job is to present that information in the most concise and understandable way we can so people can make a decision based on what they know rather than speculation. And it's going to take some work.
Huge. Bob?
Yeah, is it appropriate to make a motion at this meeting, or is just, if not a motion, I'm gonna make a suggestion.
Go ahead.
What I would like to see is a subcommittee made up of 2 school committee members, one from Whitman, one from Hanson, 2 representatives from Whitman, 2 representatives from Hanson, the town side, 2 community members, maybe one from Hanson, one from Whitman, probably the superintendent and our business manager, to meet and to discuss and try and get to the core of the problem. Again, my frustration is we're going in a circle. We've been here about, I don't know how long we've been here. I haven't looked at the clock. We've been here for a while. And I think the dialogue needs to sort of get more concentrated on what can we do, what can we not do. And if we find out that whatever the numbers are, that we have to go a different route, then we go a different route. If the numbers come to our favor, they come to our favor. But that would be my suggestion. I just think that a larger meeting like this, we just seem to be going in circles. This is the second time we've done this year. And I know in the past we've had meetings such as this, and everything just seems to go this way. And I would just like to streamline it, and maybe things would be a little more productive.
Okay. Well, there's been a lot of suggestions this evening. We've had some good input. I want to thank Josh. I want to thank you for coming. Jackie, I want to thank you for coming. Excuse me. We said these meetings were going to be an hour and a half, no longer, so we wouldn't keep boring. I think we had good input from the committee members, from the towns. I do want to reiterate, I know Frank, Mike, Jim, we need that solution of long-term. We need to build a base. Maybe Bob's right with the suggestion of streamlining it to come back. I'm not quite sure. But let's all take in what we've heard this evening, and we'll get back at it at another date. I'll get back with everybody and think about if you think streamlining will work, what you think. And anything, Josh, you can see, or if you need to hear from us, you want us in there, you know I'll come. You might not want me in. Exactly. Thank you, Josh. Thank you, everyone. I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second?
All those in favor? Good night, everyone. Thank you.